Hello, my name is Dr. Kate Ringham and I'm the Programme Lead for Applied Accounting in Oxford Brookes Business School at Oxford Brookes University. And this video is looking at how to reference, and in particular how to use Harvard referencing. So just to start, let us review the assessment criteria for the elements of referencing. So the assessment criteria are published in the information pack. They're available so you can review those to make sure that your work meets a pass standard. So with respect to referencing, the pass standard is that there's clear evidence of the use of systematic referencing. So Harvard, which is a form of referencing, is the Oxford Brookes standard, but if you know other methodologies such as the American Psychological Association, you can use those as long as they're applied methodically. So it's not a requirement to use Harvard referencing, it is a requirement to use systematic referencing. If you've never done any referencing before, I really suggest that you follow the Harvard guidance. The second area that is a requirement for a pass standard is that the list of references includes the references cited in the body of the text and no others. And all the citations used in the body of the text are included in the reference list and can be traced to a source. So we're not asking you to produce a bibliography, which is a list of everything that you've read. We're asking you to include the list of everything that you've cited in your work. So just to look on the other side then, what happens if you have a fail in the area of referencing? Then you would fail if there are obvious sources that have been omitted. So for example, if you haven't included the annual report for the company that you're looking at, or you've substantially relied on a single source, you're likely to fail. You will fail if there's no evidence of a systematic approach to referencing, and you would also fail if there are references in the body of the text or references in the reference list that aren't included in the other part. And just as a reminder, it is unacceptable academic conduct to include false references or references that do not support your findings or analysis. So if you submit false references or a pre-prepared reference list, you may find yourself under academic conduct investigation. So let's now look then at what we mean by systematic referencing. So as I said, Oxford Brookes, the standard form of referencing we use in the business school is called Harvard referencing. And there's two elements to a reference. There's what you include in the text, and then there's an entry in the reference list. So in the text, you include the author's surname, not their initials, just their surname, and the date of publication. So this is why Brookes Harvard referencing is known as an author date system. So in the text, author's surname and then the date of publication. So I've got an example here of where I have searched for information about the luxury goods sector. I've discovered a report on the future of luxury bouncing back from COVID, and it's been published by Bain & Company. Now Bain & Company are a reputable consultancy company, so when I'm evaluating this source I'm thinking, yep, they might know something about this. The date of the article is January 2021, so that's timely. And you can see here that there are also named authors. So Claudia, Frederica, Filippo, Constance and Joel are named as authors. So let's think about how we can include this as a reference in our work. So in the text, as I mentioned, we use the author and the date. Well, we know that the authors were Claudia, Frederica, Filippo, Constance and Joel. And there are 5 of those authors. So under Brookes Harvard referencing, when we have 4 or more authors, we use the phrase et al. So in the text we use the first named author, D'Apizio and then we include et al. And we put the date in brackets. So we've got author, date, and then we would perhaps say they suggested something, or we would paraphrase what was included in that article and then make reference to the source entirely in brackets. So in that case we put the name, et al, a comma, and the date. There is a separate video on paraphrasing and academic writing, but now we're just concentrating on the referencing. So in text we include the author's surname, no initial, and the date of publication. And depending on how you approach that, it's whether or not it all appears in brackets or just the date appears in brackets. So as I mentioned, if there are 2 or 3 authors, both or all 3 names are given. So for example, Lines, Pritchard and Walker. Or if there are 4 or more, we use the phrase et al. It's just because with 4 or more authors' names, the work becomes unwieldy to read. Now, in the reference list, the way that we would include this depends on whether or not we had looked at the report as a web page or whether we had downloaded the PDF. So in both instances, we include in the reference list the author's name and initial, and because there are 5 authors, we include the et al, the date. We then include the title of the article, and we include that in italics. So that's the future of luxury bouncing back from COVID. The title is given in italics, and we then explain where we got it from. So that's the URL. Because we had downloaded that as a PDF, we give the date on which we downloaded that information. The second example here, again we give the name with an initial, and et al to indicate there were lots of authors, the date in brackets, we give the title of the article in italics, and because we've accessed that as web pages rather than a PDF, we just include the web address and then the date on which we accessed it. So it's really important that as you are gathering information, you are making a note of the nature of the source, and in particular that URL, because we all know web pages change and sometimes it's hard to find the article again. So please, if you download anything, if you're reading things from web pages, make a note of the title and author and the date that you accessed information and the web address that you got the information from. Another area that you might want to think about in terms of sources that you're using is if you're going to use diagrams from study texts, and this is often in the case of models. So I've got an example here of Porter's value chain, and I've taken that model from the Kaplan Knowledge Bank. So I've spoken a little bit in the models videos on the Kaplan Knowledge Bank. Great source of reliable, reputable models, because it's the Kaplan study materials that is a downloadable source there. So how would we reference this particular model in our work? Well, in the text we would take a copy of the image, the diagram, and then we would reference the source as Kaplan Financial, and the web page had a date on it of 2020, and then in the reference list we take the author's name, which happens to be the organization, Kaplan Financial, and we have got the date 2020, and then we've got the title, Porter's Value Chain, and it's available from, again we include that web address and the date on which we accessed it. So just reminding ourselves of those pass criteria, it's about being able to trace sources, and so in terms of that need to be able to trace sources, we explain why that's important in the video Why We Reference, We do have other videos on referencing academic articles. There will referencing if you're doing primary research, and there will be videos on academic writing and paraphrasing. So please do subscribe to the BSc Applied Accounting YouTube channel to make sure that you don't miss anything.